Welcome to the Head Above Water podcast. This devotional podcast is designed to help you reach out to Jesus and keep your head above water.
Episode 8, Joshua 1 through 4, after this. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, 5 books of the Bible. Can you believe that if you've been with us from the beginning, we've journeyed through 5 books of the Bible? We've journeyed from creation to Joshua. We've seen God created Adam in the garden. He covenanted with Abraham on the hillside, saved Isaac on the mountain, worked through Jacob's life in Egypt, and rescued the Israelites from slavery with Moses. Now Joshua stands at the gates of the promised land, literally across the river from the promised land with great anticipation. Have you ever been to Disneyland and stood at the gate of the Magic Kingdom? Do you realize how exciting that was? Do you know why athletes put on their Beats headphones and get ready and get psyched up for a game? That's what we see here in Joshua chapter 1. 3 times in a rather brief paragraph, God instructs Joshua to be strong and courageous. Why? For starters, Joshua needed to hear this message. He needed the encouragement, and he needed to hear it more than once. Joshua knew there was going to be a big challenge before him. He had seen the Canaanites before. He knew the land he was about to lead his people into, and it was full of strong armies and fortified cities. But it was more than that. Joshua needed strength and courage to lead God's people. He had seen how they had treated Moses with contempt. He had seen how they had grumbled against Moses and accused Moses of leadership failures and rebelled against Moses. Yet Joshua needed to be reminded over and over to be strong and courageous. First, Joshua was going to need to be strong and courageous to distribute the land. Before they could distribute the land, though, they would have to possess it, and the Israelites would have to conquer it. Second, Joshua had to be strong and courageous to observe the law. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, had been written down by Moses before his death. Now Joshua's leadership over God's people, he had this gift from God through Moses to rely upon to give them guidance and direction. Third, Joshua had to be strong and courageous and not afraid or discouraged because God was with them. The Israelites were literally at the gate of the promised land. They were ready to inhabit the land. Reminds me of a quote by C.S. Lewis. It says, "Everybody's going to glorify God eventually, but it matters a lot whether you glorify him like Judas or like John." The Israelites have been here before. They have been poised at the gate of the promised land, waiting to go in. And last time, they chose to not trust God. This time, God whispers in Joshua's ear, "I'm going to do a great thing." And he did. When the Ark of the Covenant led the people into the water of the Jordan River, the water stood still, and the priests stood firmly in the middle of the river, and the people crossed on dry land. The only reason that the priests could stand firm was because the Lord's presence was there and caused the waters to stand still. God went before them, before his people, to make the way, and this is what gave them strength and courage and the ability to follow and obey him. The priests holding the ark in the middle of the dry river was a picture that the Israelites needed of how God would give them the land. So they took stones, and not just any stones. They took stones from the middle of the river to remind them of what God had done for them. They took stones from the river to remind them of God's providence. The Israelites gathered stones where the priests stood and continued to stand holding the ark. This was a symbol of God's presence. God was the one holding back the waters. He proved his might from that spot in the middle of the river. They selected stones from the point of greatest danger, the middle of the river. If the water came rushing back on them, they would have, at least to some degree, if they'd been safer if they were closer to either side, but they were in the middle.
Far from the banks and far from the safety that they afforded. God performed a miracle to pave the way, but the Israelites still had to step out in faith, cross the riverbed. It was in the middle, at the greatest point of danger, where the Israelites had to trust God the most, and where their trust in God was most evident. They collected rocks because they needed to remember what they did to believe in God and that he was worthy of their faith then, and that he would be throughout the conquest and beyond.
And now it's time for Verse of the Week, a segment where we highlight a truth from Scripture.
Isaiah 26:8. Yes, Lord, walking in the way of your truth, we wait for you. Your name and renown are the desires of our hearts.
And now, 3 questions. 3 questions is the part of the Head Above Waters podcast where we ask you 3 questions and you apply the truth of Scripture to your life.
Question 1. What should our response be when we doubt God's guidance in our lives? What should our response be when we doubt God's guidance in our lives? Question 2. What is the connection between obedience to God and trusting in His Word? What is the connection between obedience to God and trusting in His Word? Question 3. How does this account teach us to be prepared for God to work in mighty ways? How does this account teach us to be prepared for God to work in mighty ways?
Thank you for listening to the Head Above Water podcast. This podcast is a production of Midkiff Ministries for the use of our audience. The song Think Big is provided by Scott Holmes via Creative Commons Attribution License.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.